Hello, hello. Are we on? Greetings, greetings. Welcome, everybody. I'm Tony.
I'm Leona.
And welcome to Tony and Leona Live. And today is Wednesday, November 10th.
Yep.
I'd like to thank you all for joining us today. And it's also the Feast of St. Leo.
My patron.
Happy Feast Day, Leona.
He defeated Attila the Hun by negotiation. He convinced Attila the Hun to not attack Rome. And I think it's because Attila the Hun saw a vision of like Peter and Paul by Pope Leo, but still very cool.
Awesome. Well, welcome, John, producer John. Yeah. And so today's show, we're going to break down a study. Do you want to introduce a little bit about what we're going to be talking about, Leona?
Yeah, it's a piece published in the BMJ, the British Medical Journal, and which is a peer-reviewed journal, and it's currently in there. So we're going to talk
BMJ
a little bit.
BMJ is a pretty large medical publication.
The fourth largest cited medical journal worldwide.
Mm-hmm.
So we'll talk a little bit about what it means to be a peer-reviewed journal. We'll talk about the New England Journal of Medicine, which reported on the safety and efficacy of the Pfizer trials way back before they were authorized under the emergency use authorization. And then we'll talk a little bit about the 4 phases of a clinical trial, because I think that's important to understand whether any of this has significance.
Interesting stuff. I mean, one of the reasons why we decided to start this show and to also do some of the social media stuff that we do, like Tony and Leona on Instagram, and we're also on Twitter, kind of, but just getting started, is mainly because everything that happened the last couple of years with COVID and with some other things, it really, I mean, Leona, I don't know if you love to do research, but you spend a lot of time looking into these issues. And
I like reading journals.
And for anyone who doesn't know, Leona has a background in nursing. She's an ICU nurse. She was a peds ICU nurse for a number of years. She has a nursing license in Minnesota and in
New York.
And New York State.
Only because the law changed when I was in New York on a travel contract. When I got there, I could be there on my Minnesota license. When I was there mid-contract, it changed and I had to get a New York license.
And when the pandemic first hit, Leona went out to New York City, worked in a couple of different ICUs there in the NYU hospital system.
Yeah, mostly one there.
And then went to Florida after that when it got really bad in Florida. And then from there went to California.
In Florida,
So we're just saying this because Leona has worked directly with COVID patients in the ICU. She's got a lot of experience with that. And she also has the credentials and also with the research. But we also want to make clear that we are not offering any sort of medical advice. One thing that's been made clear throughout the pandemic is that we're all made differently as individuals. So we all require unique treatments and protections from diseases based off of decisions that you make in confidentiality with you and your physician or your medical advisor. So we're definitely not offering any medical advice, and even saying the topic of this show, we're going to be focusing primarily just on the allegations that were brought forth by a researcher turned, even though we don't like this term too much, but whistleblower. And she made a number of claims. But before we get into that topic, we just wanted to go over a few of the headlines that we're going to do with every show, just to kind of start it out before we get into the main topic. But we like to start out with some good news, some positive news.
Sometimes it's hard to find.
It is, but not right now. I mean, here's one great story. So we covered it actually in our first episode, our first live stream. But this is out of New Jersey. The Senate President, Steve Sweeney, of the New Jersey State Senate, he conceded his election this week, and he lost to a truck driver who spent around $200 in total on his campaign.
I have seen one report that said he spent something like $3,000 maybe. But I know it was
probably got some signs. But the main point is this Steve Sweeney was in office, and he was one of the most powerful members of the New Jersey State Senate. He was the president of the state Senate, and he lost to a political novice, to a truck driver. So that election's over. The gubernatorial race in New Jersey is still up in the air. The Tony and Leona live show, we have not called a victor in that, although the AP did declare the incumbent Murphy the winner. However, the Republican competitor in that race, Ciccarelli, we never know how to say his name, Chittarelli, something like that, but he hasn't conceded yet. It's extremely close. Everyone thought this was going to be a blowout race. The polls ahead of time were way off by up to like 9 or 10 points in the days leading to it.
So
But
either
that's
way, it was
still
a
up in the
very
air.
close race, less than a point,
Yep,
right?
yeah,
to
and they're
give
going to
some context,
probably do a recount, and it looks like the Republican competitor, he seems like he'd be a pretty great governor. He's not making any allegations of voter integrity at this point. He's just saying it was so close that they're going to have to
Well,
do
and also not every vote was counted yet, right?
Yeah, they had some glitches with the machines in Middlesex, and we talked about that earlier. So
yeah, that's the
good
only
news.
claim he's made, that every vote should be counted. He hasn't said this is wrong and I won. Or...
Yeah, and we also have some other great news. Did you hear Big Bird has been vaccinated? So any of the spread that was going on amongst enormous imaginary birds, you don't have to worry about that anymore. Big Bird is fully covered with that. So I think was Big Bird vaccinated this week or last week.
I think I've seen tweets about it mostly this week, but.
Yeah, and then in other news, the Kyle Rittenhouse case is going on right now. While I was doing some work today, I was streaming it earlier today when I was kind of doing some work for my real estate. But I was listening. There was a lot of drama. Kyle Rittenhouse actually took the stand, which I wasn't expecting. And all of a sudden, there he is right there.
Wow.
Getting grilled by the prosecution. Wow. He broke down at one point. A lot of drama. The judge in this case, he actually went after the prosecutor pretty hard.
For what?
He brought up some things that were never approved ahead of time for him to bring up during his examination. Oh, okay. And the judge in the case, Judge Schrader, just told the jury to go away for a while, and he just laid into this prosecutor, just laid into him. And then he gave him a warning. He's like, if this happens again, this is going to be a mistrial. But it looks like next week this trial is going to be finished, and then it's going to take a number of days or weeks or whenever the jury comes to their conclusion. So we're going to be watching this. This brings back a lot of memories from the summer of 2020 in Kenosha, if you remember what happened there. This is extremely divisive case, and like many issues in America, you can divide it almost on party lines. Conservatives, Republicans tend to think that Kyle Rittenhouse was acting in self-defense and that he's going to be found not guilty, whereas progressives, Democrats, liberals, they tend to think that Kyle Rittenhouse should be going to jail because he killed people not acting in self-defense, that he shouldn't have been there in the first place. And
can we all think nobody should have been doing what they were doing?
Yeah, I mean, I think maybe we'll cover the case maybe in more detail later. But yeah, the crux of the whole case is was he acting in self-defense? It's ultimately what it comes down to. It doesn't really matter why he was there in a way.
Suppose,
but
at that moment.
Yeah. That being said, interesting, and we're going to follow it because we all know it happened in Kenosha. So depending on what the verdict is of this trial, it's going to have implications, and just something I think that we should all be aware of. So anything else? There were some inflation reports that came out.
We should do a whole episode on inflation.
Yeah. And the inflation was higher than it's been since 1990, year over year.
Do you know who it is? I would have kept this if I thought we'd talk about it today, but some major news outlets said that inflation is actually good. Like this is actually a good thing that we're having.
Yeah, I don't know about that.
Yeah,
I don't know about that.
I'll find it. We can talk about it another time.
But yeah, getting back into our topic at hand, Leona, do you want to just reintroduce again?
Sure.
What we're going to be talking about here?
British Medical Journal is a peer-reviewed journal. What that means is a board of scholarly reviewers in the subject matter. So in this case, in medicine, in science, and health. So in an area of the journal, that they review all materials that are published prior to them being published. So they review them for two main reasons: quality of research And second, adherence to the editorial standards of that particular journal. So BMJ is a peer-reviewed journal. The New England Journal of Medicine is also a peer-reviewed journal, and I bring them up because they're the ones, like I was saying earlier, they published a report on the safety and efficacy of the Pfizer trial. That is still there. They have not retracted their published piece on that, and the BMJ's piece on what we're going to talk about today is also still published in the BMJ. So two peer-reviewed journals currently have these in place. So most things that I've seen in the news about this BMJ piece says it's a Pfizer whistleblower, and it's a woman. This is true. I just want to delve a little bit more into just the whistleblower. Hi, Rosie. I love it. Yes, big Brooke. So Brooke Jackson, it was a regional director for Ventavia. Ventavia, I hope I'm pronouncing it correctly, is a research group employed by Pfizer. They
contracted.
Yeah, contracted by Pfizer. Yeah, thank you. They had 3 of the sites in the Pfizer phase 3 clinical trials. There were a total of 153 sites. So 3 of those 153 sites were run by Ventavia Research Group. One of those sites at one of those sites, the regional director was Brooke Jackson. She's a trained clinical trial auditor. She has 15 years of experience in clinical research coordination and management. So she is the one who first brought this up to BMJ. Prior to that, she brought her concerns to Ventavia directly, allegedly multiple times. And then after that, sorry, I'm laughing at this comment, big bird flu. And then after that, she actually brought her concerns directly to the FDA, both in a phone call and an email. I'll go over that in a minute. I just want to say all of this is regarding the phase 3 clinical trial that Pfizer did in order to determine whether or not to go through with the emergency use authorization for the Pfizer shot for adults. So this is before we were doing this for children. And what a phase 3 clinical trial is it focuses on whether or not a treatment is safe and effective for a wide variety of people. So in general, for like the general population. So the things that come before it are obviously phase 1 and phase 2 clinical trials. Phase 1 is determining, is a treatment safe in humans and where does it distribute throughout the body? Phase 2 cannot happen unless there's approval from the FDA. So if there's approval from the FDA, so in this case there was, you go on to phase 2, and phase 2 determines what the dosage and effectiveness is in treating a very particular disease. So in this case, obviously it was the COVID vaccine for SARS-CoV-2. After that, then they went on to phase 3, which is this clinical trial, like I said, focusing on whether a treatment is safe and effective for a wide variety of people. And that's what brings us to everything we're discussing today. And just real quick to give kind of a complete picture of all of this, I'm sorry if everyone listening knows this, the phase 4 clinical trial is what we're currently in now. So phase 4 is post-market surveillance or reporting of adverse events. So the Moderna trial is currently set to end on October 27th of 2022. Okay. So in almost exactly a year from now. And then the Pfizer trial will end on January 31st, 2023. This is standard practice. So I have seen a lot of people say like, these trials aren't even done. This is insane that people are getting this. This is standard practice for all therapeutics, vaccines, medication, that the phase 4 trial is after phase 1, 2, and 3, and it is post-market surveillance. That's what it is. So that in and of itself is not rare with this. I would argue it should be a no-brainer that we should not be mandating this since the trials are not done for either Moderna or Pfizer. But it's not like, oh, this has never happened before. Oh, this is so weird that it's in the general public before the phase 4 trial is done. That part is standard practice. One super quick thing. There's so many like tangents on all of this, but I promise I'll get back to the main story. But a really quick thing, OSHA is not enforcing requirements, which they usually have, requirements saying that employers need to report any adverse events that their employees have when receiving these COVID vaccines. So that's kind of interesting. So we're in this trial, this phase 4 of the trial, like I said, that is standard practice, but it's a little crazy that OSHA, a branch of the government, is saying we're going to suspend the need to report adverse events because that in of itself means this phase of the trial at least according to OSHA standards, we're really not conducting this phase of the trial as we should be. Okay, so back to
before you get too much more into the story, I just wanted to disclose again. So what we're going to bring up here, and what you have done a lot of research on, is allegations that were made by a contracted clinical director, former for Pfizer.
Contracted regional director is her term. Yeah,
and she's a clinical trial auditor.
Sure. Yes, she's trained as a clinical trial auditor. And in this case, for Ventavia, she was a regional director for Ventavia, which was one of the companies contracted by
And
Pfizer.
she has evidence, and she has documented her claims, and these claims, not the evidence, but the presence of the evidence, were published in the British Medical Journal recently, within the last...
On November 2nd, I believe.
Okay, so within the last week. So what we're covering here is factual data, published data. We are not interjecting our own judgments. And we also wanted to make clear that the allegations that are being made, they don't necessarily discount the vaccine. It doesn't mean that it's an unsafe shot. We're not saying that you shouldn't get it.
Yeah.
And we're also saying that you don't have to get it either, but we're just simply bringing up what this person, who's highly qualified and was working in these trials, the allegations that this person made. So we're not making any judgments on the shot, on Pfizer, but strictly just their methodology and how they conducted these trials, which we find very important, because people who are hesitant, right? People who want a little more time for Pfizer and Moderna to really prove themselves long-term safety, efficacy. These people want to be confident of the data. So we always hear, follow the science. It's science, listen to the scientists. Well, if the scientific scientific process wasn't followed, or if we have data issues or integrity issues, that's not going to help to bring more confidence. It's going to actually increase the hesitancy part. So this is why we're covering it. Like we, as people, as consumers, as people who use pharmaceutical products, like we need to demand the highest standards in terms of how the science is conducted. So.
Yeah, and we mean that sincerely. I mean, you'll hear me. I said it today, and I have no problem making a statement on my beliefs on whether or not this should be mandated. I have strong views on that, and I will state those views. But that is not me making a statement on what somebody else should choose to put or to not put into their bodies. And I mean that.
So let's get back into it then.
So why did the British Medical Journal publish this? I thought that might be an interesting way to try to objectively somewhat look at this. So according to Paul D. Thacker, who is the investigative journalist who wrote this piece, which was then published by the BMJ, he wrote that BMJ has, in his words, quote, dozens of internal company documents from Ventavia, the research group, and photos, audio recordings, and emails, end quote. So he has the documents, photos, audio recordings, and emails. And then he also has what Brooke Jackson shared with him. And then there are also two other employees of Ventavia who spoke with him anonymously. So he spoke with those three people. He has, in his words, dozens of internal company documents, photos, audio recordings, and emails. And then there's also some information directly from the FDA that relates to this, that the FDA published themselves. And then there's also some information from another company called ICON, ICON, all capital letters, which is a contract research organization with which Pfizer partnered on their trial, for their trial. So all of that information is in the report that Paul Thacker, the investigative journalist for BMJ. So, I will talk first about what Brooke Jackson said and try to parse out what we know for sure, what might just be her speculation, what doesn't really matter, what is important. So Brooke Jackson said that within Ventavia, where she was working, which was, again, part of the Pfizer trial.
Contracted with Pfizer to conduct these clinical trials.
Yes, these phase 3 clinical trials, that there was unblinded staff, unblinded patients, and unblinded meaning either the participants knew whether or not they were receiving placebo or receiving the vaccine, and also staff knew. So unblinded patients, unblinded staff, and the principal
Which
investigator.
wasn't supposed to happen, right?
Correct. Yeah. To have a double blind study, your principal investigator absolutely has to be blind, meaning can't know who in the trial was in the placebo group, who only received placebo, and who in the trial received the intervention, because then that investigative journalist, I'm sorry, not the investigative journalist, the principal investigator for the trial might allow some subconscious bias to determine how they are interpreting data if they know who was placebo and who was not. And then in the same way, the trial participants need to be blind and not know whether they are receiving the placebo or the treatment, because then their reports of symptoms might be different. Again, because of I'm not saying anyone would choose to do that, but subconsciously you might then have bias if you know those things. Another thing she claimed was falsified data. Another thing she claimed was.
So did they get into that a little more? Because that's a major
claim. Can I finish her claims and then is that okay? So unblinded staff, unblinded patients, falsified data. Again, these are her claims. Employed inadequately trained vaccinators, that Ventavia was slow to follow up on adverse events, that the staff who conducted the quality control checks were overwhelmed with problems that they found, and that, so those were her claims. And then as a result of her seeing these things, which she claimed, she told Ventavia multiple times, and there's a little bit more about that in a minute. And then she eventually went to the FDA. So I just want to make sure I'm saying the right thing. She first called the FDA, and this was on September 25th of 2020.
Okay.
She then reported her concerns in an email. Later that afternoon, on the same day, Ventavia fired her. Their reason was, quote, that she was not a good fit. The FDA actually replied to her email and also called her. They stated that there was no further information they could provide to her, and that the FDA could not comment on any investigation that might result. I think that makes sense that they couldn't tell her what was going to happen, but I actually think that matters most because we know that the FDA heard her concerns and replied to her. So that's what Brooke Jackson reported. Those things, it's one person. Of course, then she was fired. Is there a chance that she's, I don't know, falsifying all of it? Maybe she's angry at being fired. She'd never been fired before. So I think, we should take all of this with a grain of salt.
I wouldn't say grain of salt. I mean, she's a credible person. It's not just like somebody who didn't work in the trials or wasn't involved. It's not like it was some, like say janitorial worker in the labs who found stuff in the trash. Like,
not that a janitor.
This person was part of the trials.
She's trained. Yeah.
And not only that, she's
not part of them, but
she's a professional. Yeah. I mean, this is her background.
Yeah.
So
yeah, you're right.
A little more than a grain of salt.
Sure.
It doesn't mean she doesn't have ulterior motives.
Absolutely. Yeah.
That's
well said.
So
that's well said. So, I think that's well said. Trying to hash out what is for sure, maybe objectively, what should we find concerning in this? One interesting thing is that the investigative journalist for BMJ who wrote this piece, he said clearly that he has photos of the drug assignment confirmation printouts being left in charts that were open. So he has photo evidence showing that at least some of her claims, or to at least some degree, her claims of the blinding part of the trial being done incorrectly seem to be true. So that means if they were in the chart, it means that the participants in the trial could have seen them. It also means that the staff, so like I was talking about the principal investigator could have potentially seen that and then known which patients were receiving, or which trial participants were receiving placebo and which were receiving the vaccine. So that at least seems somewhat credible. And then also the investigative journalist for the British Medical Journal states that he has photos of sharps, so the needles that were used for the injections, being kept in bags instead of in sharps containers. That does not mean that, that's certainly not equivalent to, data being falsified or something like that. But it's certainly a safety concern, and it's beyond sloppy. Like in how many hospitals have I worked
Can you explain it more in lay terms? So they were taking the needles and putting them where?
In bags.
Rather than disposing them in the
usually
sharps.
I'm sure we've all seen in, public bathrooms and in our doctor's offices, it's usually a box and it's sturdy plastic. Everyone that I've seen is plastic, but it's sturdy so that a needle can't puncture the box. And usually there's a two-way, not valve, but sort of device on it so that once you put a sharp in there, you can't reach in and get it out. Okay. So I can't reach in and touch someone else's.
So you just throw them in the trash bag, and whoever's emptying the trash could bump it against their leg and could jab them.
Yeah. Or even if it's not the person emptying the trash, I mean, if it's literally in bags that are visible, anyone walking by.
So a primary safety concern.
Yeah.
Okay. So what else?
And then another interesting thing that is not just from Brooke Jackson is that with this group ICON, so the contract research organization with which Pfizer partnered on the trial, they emailed Ventavia directly. So it doesn't have anything to do with Brooke Jackson, with the whistleblower. So ICON emailed Ventavia also in September of 2020, and they said, quote, "The expectation for this study is that all queries are addressed within 24 hours, end quote." And then they highlighted, per BMJ, ICON highlighted for Ventavia over 100 outstanding queries, which were all older than 3 days. He gave one example of these queries. He said there were two individuals for which, quote, "the subject has reported severe symptoms and reactions," end quote. And Ventavia never reached out to these people, as far as we know. At least at that time, these people who reported severe, I want to say the right quote, reported severe symptoms and reactions had not been contacted by Ventavia within 24 hours. So maybe they were after that. Maybe that was all dealt with appropriately, but at least at this time, ICON contacted Ventavia about that and about over 100 queries that had not been responded to within the 24 hours.
Okay, so to re-explain that then, these were people who were in the study who showed symptoms potentially of COVID-19?
Okay. Reported severe symptoms and reaction. Well, maybe yeah, that's why I'm trying to read the quote, because you might be right. Severe symptoms and reactions. So maybe it's people who had COVID or severe symptoms of COVID, or maybe it was reactions to the vaccine. I'm not sure.
Adverse reactions from the vaccine that weren't followed up on.
Yeah. Okay. At least within the time frame that ICON said they need to be followed up on.
Okay.
So this is outside documented reporting that doesn't have anything to do with Brooke Jackson. Okay. And then another thing that I think is worth noting is from the FDA directly. So I already said how Brooke Jackson, after contacting Ventavia, they didn't do anything. She contacted the FDA on September 25th of 2020. She called them and then wrote her concerns in an email. The FDA responded to her. We do know from another employee of Ventavia who did remain anonymous. So this is an anonymous person who also spoke with BMJ, with the investigative reporter who wrote this published article in the BMJ, that there never was a federal audit. So as far as we know, the FDA never looked into this site. We do know from the FDA that and I want to use the right quote, they inspected 9 of 153 sites. So like I said at the very beginning, the entire phase 3 Pfizer clinical trial happened at 153 different sites. Ventavia enrolled over 1,000 people at 3 sites. So the FDA did not tell us which of the 9 sites they inspected, but we know that they inspected 9 sites out of 153. And from this anonymous other person, not Brooke Jackson, other employee of Ventavia, that there was never a federal investigation at this Ventavia site where Brooke Jackson worked. So it seems that the FDA never looked into this more and investigated it more. Pfizer, however, did. Pfizer did do an audit, but the FDA did not. Another interesting thing is that during the FDA Advisory Committee meeting, which took place on December 10th of 2020, Pfizer did not mention Ventavia in the meeting at all. And they were made aware of the concerns there and didn't say like, oh, there were these concerns, they're fine. We looked at Pfizer's own audit of it and decided that was enough and we didn't need to look into it ourselves, or something like that. They didn't mention it at all. Not saying there were for sure concerns, just that they didn't mention it. And then the next day is when the emergency use authorization was authorized by Pfizer. And then again, as I think we all know, in August of this year of 2021, the FDA gave full authorization for Pfizer for the Comirnaty. Is that what it's called? I can't even remember. And then one other thing that came directly from the FDA is that full trial swabs were not taken from 477 people who were participants in the phase 3 clinical trial who had suspected and symptomatic COVID.
Okay, so this is what I was thinking of. Then.
Yes.
So read that again. Explain that again.
So per the FDA, full trial swabs were not taken from 477 people who were participating in the phase 3 clinical trial who had suspected symptomatic COVID. Now, these people could have been in the placebo group, which means if they had tested these people and they were confirmed COVID, it would actually mean that the efficacy of the vaccines at the time this was released is higher than Pfizer was reporting. Or if these 477 people were in the treatment group who received the vaccine and they did have confirmed COVID, but it was never tested. And because it was never tested, it was never reported, it could mean that the efficacy was lower. So either way, the FDA themselves reported, and that was one of the things that Brooke Jackson said generally, but the FDA themselves said that the trial swabs were not taken from 477 people who were participating in the phase 3 trial who had suspected symptomatic COVID. So,
and no explanation as to why.
No, they did not. And then one other maybe random thing, but kind of interesting. Since all of this, Pfizer has hired Ventavia as a research subcontractor again on 4 other vaccine clinical trials. One is the COVID vaccine in children and young adults. The second is the COVID vaccine in pregnant women. The third is booster doses after the first 2 shots. And the fourth is an RSV vaccine trial. So I'm not saying it's bad, just interesting. So one, trying to give like a somewhat of a well-rounded look at all of this because all of us have biases. MedPage Today. So MedPage is one word, today, and we'll share the links to all of this. I already have them up. We'll put them in the.
So if you're a healthcare worker, a doctor, nurse, you know what MedPage is because I'd never heard of it until you talked to me about it.
I subscribe to them in my email. They're a web-based medical news provider. I don't think they conduct any research. Well, I don't know. I subscribe to them, and interestingly, I don't think I'd ever seen anyone mention them until recently. And I've seen a few healthcare providers who I used to work with share articles from them saying that people in healthcare can't say no to this vaccine. So I would say, like everything, I think MedPage Today has a fairly strong bias in that direction. But it doesn't mean everything that they share is false. And I still get their emails and I read most of them. I think it's interesting.
So what did they say?
Share. So they, on November 5th, so a couple days after this BMJ article, they share. So this is not a peer-reviewed journal or anything. It's a news source, but I still think they share interesting things. So on November 5th, they put out in my inbox an article titled "Experts Blow Whistle on Alleged COVID Vax Whistleblower Claims." So I think clearly they're trying to like help us think in a certain way. And maybe they're right that like, let's listen to the experts on this alleged whistleblower from Pfizer. So they did, interestingly, they had a couple paragraphs on the needles in bags, which we were talking about, which is clearly a safety concern, extremely sloppy, very inappropriate. However, they said correctly, needles in bags has nothing to do with data integrity. I completely agree. Where I didn't think their article was that helpful is that they didn't address any of these things. They didn't address contacting Ventavia, which had nothing to do with the alleged whistleblower. They didn't address any of the FDA's claims on the 477 people who had symptomatic and suspected COVID but weren't swabbed. They didn't address the fact that the FDA inspected 9 of 153 sites but didn't inspect this site, even though the regional director from one of the sites contacted the FDA directly. So they didn't address these things. They didn't address the photo of the showing that the drug assignment confirmation printouts weren't kept private. So the blinding wasn't done appropriately, at least for a time. So they just didn't address these things, but they did address the fact, which I agree with completely, that needles and bags doesn't have to do with data integrity. So I guess when I read something that's not addressing like the most concerning claims, it seems like, why are we? I mean, I think we all agree with that, which doesn't necessarily mean they're wrong, but to me, it wasn't that helpful. And then the other thing that's interesting is they gave a statement from the FDA themselves, which says, quote, the FDA has full confidence in the data that were used to support the Pfizer BioNTech COVID-19 vaccination authorization and the community approval, end quote. The other, I think I'm giving a fair shake of the article. Again, we'll share it in our notes. You can read it. But they also quoted Dr. Paul Offit, who is a physician from the Children's Hospital of Philadelphia, CHOP, which is very, very widely referred to specifically with vaccines. I'm not really sure why, but every provider I talk to, any questions I've had, CHOP is like who I'm always referred to. And I encourage everyone to go and read. I have read, I think, everything that they have about vaccines. Legitimately. But anyways, Dr. Paul Offit is a physician at CHOP, and he is a member of the FDA's Vaccines and Related Biological Products Advisory Committee. His quote in this MedPage Today article was, quote, it's all this sort of vague kind of hand waving. I have no idea whether any of this is true, nor do you. So he's saying that in response to the BMJ article. Again, it's all this sort of vague kind of hand waving. I have no idea whether any of this is true, nor do you, end quote. Some of it is vague, like Brooks claims. And that's why I went into I keep forgetting their name. What did ICON contact Ventavia about? What did the FDA say about these things? And what is their actual photo evidence of? Because those things aren't vague. And my biggest sort of issue, and I'm sure Dr. Paul Offit is a wonderful physician in every way, and I mean that sincerely, but it's very interesting to me that his statement is, I have no idea whether any of this is true, nor do you, when he is a member of the FDA's Vaccines and Related Biological Products Advisory Committee. Should he not have responded to the concerns that Brooke Jackson had?
Yeah.
Like he's the one, he should know whether these things are true. Or he
at least has the resources and access and authority that he would need to get into that type of thing.
Yeah.
And Pfizer definitely has been on a PR offensive as of lately. For instance, the Pfizer Inc. tweet, Twitter account.
Yeah.
They just posted this or tweeted this yesterday. But it says it's easy to get distracted by misinformation these days, but don't worry. It said science has your back, and it's a meme of the human brain and wild conspiracy theories.
So it's like a human brain trying to catch a globe of wild conspiracy theories.
But
then isn't it like science holding back the brain or something?
Something like that. But then the Pfizer CEO, there's just an article. This is published out of CNBC, November 9th. Berkeley Lovelace Jr. Pfizer CEO says people who spread misinformation on COVID vaccines are criminals, is the exact quote. I'll just read a little bit of that. But he went on TV and said this. He said, people who spread misinformation on COVID-19 vaccines are criminals and have cost millions of lives, Pfizer CEO Albert Bourla said Tuesday. Speaking with Washington, D.C. based think tank Atlantic Council, Bourla said, there is a very small group of people that purposefully circulate misinformation on the shots, misleading those who are already hesitant about getting vaccinated. Those people are criminals, he told the Atlantic Council CEO. They're not bad people. They're criminals because they have literally cost millions of lives. So they're not bad people, but they're criminals who are.
I think he's saying they're beyond bad people, baby.
No, he says they're not bad people. Well, maybe
I guess
they're worse than bad people.
Yeah, that's how I took it. They're not bad people.
Regardless, so there's a little bit of an offensive taking place. But going back to
Can I
the
just
allegations,
respond to that really quickly?
sure.
Somebody who has concerns about a vaccine, which is new. There's no way to shake it. Again, Dr. Rubin, like even this statement, I don't know why some people are hesitant to say they're new. They're new. Yes, they are new. Like science moved really fast and created these. They're new. We know Dr. Rubin of the FDA said, quote, "We're never going to learn how safe these are for children until we start giving them to children." That's not a conspiracy. That's not misinformation to state that reality.
That's what they're saying, yeah.
COVID is also somewhat of a risk for children. You can look at our, I think, third episode. We delve into a lot of the stats on that, on how much of a risk it is for children. We know how much of a risk it is currently for children. What we don't know is whether the vaccines in the long run will be good or bad. There is some amount of risk. What's interesting is somebody who is hesitant to take a new vaccine is only going to even remotely consider one of these vaccines if someone says, "You're totally right to have these concerns about the fact that we have been lied to by people who are at the heads of these organizations. The fact that gyms have been shut down, even once we knew it was safe to be in a gym, and even once we had studies showing, not just anecdotal evidence, but studies showing that regularly exercising decreases your chances of severe COVID. If the goal is to save lives, it makes sense to be skeptical of organizations that don't really seem to care that much about saving our lives. They seem to really just care about vaccines, which is one way to save some lives. But at the same time, there's just a lot of data that we do need to take into account. The fact that excess deaths are higher this year than they were in 2020, despite vaccines this year and not in 2020. I mean, we didn't have them till December of 2020, so the very end of the year. So those things matter.
Well, if you look at locally in Minnesota, I just saw articles today. There's I think the surge going on right now is greater than the surge that took place last year. This is the summer fall surge. 40 plus people died in one day. Yesterday, I think it was in
Very
Minnesota.
sad.
And this is with 76% of the 16 plus year old population in the state vaccinated. I read an NPR article. They're talking about their hospitalizations and ICUs, and they're not saying anymore this is a pandemic of the unvaccinated, at least in terms of Minnesota local reporting. What they're saying now is that the efficacy of the vaccines wanes after 6 months, and that's why they're seeing a surge of cases, is because people aren't boosting hard enough. The truth of that remains to be seen, but it goes back to this whole idea of these original studies. You know, you have the Pfizer CEO saying that, you know, we should all trust the science. Well, they should address some of these allegations in there. But I want to know a little more, the falsifying data. Can you go into more specifically what that was? Was that not swabbing the patients, or did they talk about it anymore?
I can repeat what I said. You're not drawing to mind a new thing to say, but the FDA said that full trial swabs, I said it quite a few times.
No, I'm saying that in the falsifying data part, that was one of the allegations that was made.
Oh, that Brooke Jackson
Does that go into specifics about what that is?
Nope. No, the BMJ report doesn't really give any specifics on her.
But does it reference that she has more evidence on that, or?
So I think I gave all the quotes. According to Paul D. Thacker, the investigative journalist who wrote the report, which was published in the BMJ, BMJ has, in his words, quote, dozens of internal company documents, photos, audio recordings, and emails.
Okay, so there's a lot of other evidence to back up these claims that we are not being provided.
Here is one other example. So the British Medical Journal has a recording from late September of 2020. And in this recording, Brooke Jackson is in it. So she's the alleged whistleblower. But this video recording is between Jackson and two directors of the Ventavia group. So a Ventavia executive explains in this recording that BMJ has that the company is unable to quantify the types and numbers of errors they found when examining the trial paperwork for quality control. That same Ventavia exec said, quote, "In my mind, it's something new every day. We know that it's significant," end quote. So, I mean, BMJ certainly didn't write the article based off of just word of mouth that Brooke Jackson said. So that's why I tried to delve in a little bit to give the more concrete things.
So, John, I'm just responding to producer John here.
Yeah.
So, did Dr. Sanjay Gupta, was he the one who inoculated Big Bird, or did they have a different doctor issue him the vax? Do you know on that?
Let us know.
Yep.
I want to say something really quickly about the evidence pyramid, because I think it's something all of us should know when we're discussing this. He said he doesn't know who actually inoculated Big Bird.
So, what do you mean evidence pyramid being a hierarchy of the
Yeah.
ranking of credibility of evidence?
Exactly. Yeah. The credibility and the validity of evidence. And I wish that we could show visuals on here, but again, I will provide a link. So this is from the Cochrane Rehab, which does not receive any outside funding. And I'll share, they have a whole PowerPoint on this. It's actually really interesting. And then I'll also share a separate article from the BMJ about kind of the old evidence pyramid and then the new one and why they're changing it. Both are really interesting and very quick reads. But the evidence pyramid, so the lowest is the least valid evidence, the most likely to have bias or inaccuracies, things like that. So the lowest is editorials and expert opinion. So that's like the worst evidence you can have. Right above that is case series and case reports. Right above that is case controlled studies. Right above that, so when I say above, I mean getting slightly more valid, less bias, hopefully. So right above that is cohort studies. Right above that and almost at the top is RCTs or randomized controlled trials. And then at the very top is systematic reviews. What's interesting and what it seems accurate to me and you can see in the BMJ article that I'll share and in this Cochrane Rehab review, people are kind of calling into question, are systematic reviews really the very best evidence that we can have? And the thought is, and you can read it in their words, but if you're reviewing poor data, your systematic review of poor data will be skewed. So theoretically, if a lot of RCTs are done well with high confidence intervals and with low biases and with accurate reporting and with good technique, good double-blind technique, things like that, then if you do a systematic review of good RCTs, of good randomized controlled trials, you should have good data, good evidence that can be applied and can be used to make decisions for people. The problem is, what if those RCTs are not done well? And so, yeah, I think that's interesting. And I think it's something that we all do need to keep in mind. And especially when it comes to case studies. And I think I'm sure I can't really explain all of this because it's so contentious, but where I think there's a little bit of a breakdown in any type of communication between people who are like absolutely no to vaccines or hesitant about vaccines, or just not like excited to get vaccines. So between people who have that mindset and people who are like, absolutely, I'm getting the vaccine for myself and my kids right away. Whatever the FDA and the CDC say, I trust and will do. I think some of the...
What about the ones who are getting the vaccine just because they want to be invited to the family Thanksgiving dinner or be invited to Christmas?
That's maybe a whole separate category.
Or how about the ones who are doing it just so that they don't look like they're Republican? There's those out there too. Or what about doing it for Walz's $200?
Oh my gosh.
There's other people too.
That's a problem with the economy. Nobody should. I mean, I have been at times in my life. Nobody should be that desperate for $200, but in an ideal world.
Sure.
So
$200 is a lot of money.
I know. And there have been times when I have sold things that I wanted to get money to buy rice and beans from the
people
store.
Donate blood for money, donate plasma.
Absolutely. So I think there's a little bit of a breakdown because I think some people are like, okay, sure, expert opinion is on the very bottom of this. Did she got 100? Expert opinions on the very bottom of this pyramid of evidence. So expert opinion is the worst. However, expert opinion from the CDC and the FDA and the NIH and World Health Organization and the AAP and all these places, theoretically, it should be based on the best research possible, should be based on RCTs, not just case studies and case reports and anecdotal evidence, right? So if you really want to follow the science, you want to follow the best evidence you can, and these organizations are going to recommend what we have. They're going to recommend the conclusions that we have come to through RCTs and through systematic reviews of RCTs. But then others, I think, notice that in some cases, it certainly seems that the RCTs are not always done with the highest caliber of accuracy and transparency that they could be. And then that's when case reports start mattering. So sure, it's a case study. Sure, it's one person who had this experience, which the FDA didn't report appropriately. But once you see that enough times, if health is really the goal, you have to start wondering, are so many of these cases not being covered up?
Yeah. Well, and you would wonder too, if people were showing signs of symptoms of COVID in the middle of the study, like why wouldn't they be tested right away?
Right.
Or if somebody's complaining about adverse effects
Yeah.
and they're in the trial, why would these people get ignored?
Right.
They should be contacted right away, documented,
Yeah.
recorded. They should be on video camera. They
Like-
should document the symptoms, the
Yeah.
times that they're occurring,
Yeah.
how far away it was from dose 1 or dose 2.
Right. Right.
Those would be things that you'd be wanting to know. Wasn't there a woman who came out and she was part of the trial? I don't know if it was for Pfizer, if it was for one of the other ones, but she talked about how she got kicked out of the study.
So Brianne Dressen is maybe who you're thinking of. I have some of this written down. So Brianne Dressen was in the Astra Zeneca trial,
Okay.
which is not authorized here, but it is in
Not the one we're discussing, but
right. But in the U.S., she willingly entered the Astra Zeneca trial, and her husband, interesting, he's a PhD. He's a chemist, and he actually focuses on the efficacy of new interventions as a chemist, which is interesting that he does that with this. But anyways, his wife entered the trial after a single dose of AstraZeneca. She had severe neurological reactions, which she is still dealing with. I mean, she's alive, she's in and out of the hospital, but she's still having these issues. So she was dropped from the trial after her reaction. I don't think in a bad, I mean, it's just, I'll just read the facts. She was dropped from the trial. Her access to the study application was deleted. Her reaction is not just, this is a quote from her husband. So she was dropped from the trial. Her access to the study application was deleted. Her reaction is not described in the recently released clinical trial report. 266 participants are described as having an adverse event leading to discontinuation. So it's not as if they didn't talk at all about people who had an adverse event after the first vaccine and couldn't continue. But that the scope of her reaction to the first dose was not accurately reported really anywhere. Also, interestingly, her husband says that, and he testified before the FDA, he said the FDA has known firsthand about her case, and he claims about thousands of others. And the FDA has also stated their own systems, again, this is his quote, their own systems are not identifying this issue, and that VAERS, which is the Vaccine Adverse Event Reporting System, is not designed to identify any multi-symptom signals. So he's saying that her reactions have not been accurately reported, and the same with others, because apparently there's not a way to document multiple reactions to the shot. So he also says her neurological injuries from her one dose of AstraZeneca was diagnosed by physicians at the NIH. And then there's another, I don't know. There's another, a young boy, Forrest Romney, I think was his name. He was a 16-year-old healthy athlete. He entered the Pfizer trial. He immediately had some swelling right afterwards, then a headache. A couple days later, he couldn't move his head at all without using his hands to move it. And then 9 days after his one dose of Pfizer, he was hospitalized with 3 blood clots. And his mom, I've actually read quite a few reports on him. And, his mom is like, maybe it wasn't the vaccines. Maybe the vaccines would have been fine if he wasn't such a strong athlete and wasn't exerting himself so much.
Did they kick him out of the study?
Got worse.
Or did they document
I'm not sure.
him?
I don't know.
I thought this was
his. I didn't look into as much.
I thought this was a good
question.
meme. I don't know if you can see this or not. No, I don't think you can. But it's Bart Simpson. It said health officials who are looking for COVID. They got this huge telescope that he's looking through. They're searching for COVID, and then it says health officials looking for adverse reactions to the shot, and it's Bart Simpson with blinded glasses on, trying to find. That was kind of funny, though. There's some truth to that.
There is some truth to it, because if this young man who again, he's alive. I think he is recovering, but that's severe to be hospitalized with 3 blood clots when you're 16. He's now 17, by the way. But this man, Forrest, I think is his name, or this young boy, if he had COVID and then had the clots, I don't think people would be like, it wasn't COVID that caused it. It was totally random. So I'm not at all with confidence saying it was the vaccine that caused it, but there is at least some degree of what's the word? I don't know. We attribute many things to COVID without a second thought, but then if it seems that the vaccine maybe caused something, we are very quick to say like, oh, it's not the shot that caused it.
Anytime there's a breakthrough case with COVID with somebody who's fully vaccinated, especially if they're famous or celebrity, the first thing that they have to say is, thank God I got the vax, because if I didn't, I'd be in the hospital or I'd be dying right now.
Yeah.
And it's vice versa, the other way around.
Mm-hmm. The other thing that's interesting, and again, I like these things don't mean nobody should get the vaccine, but they are things that shouldn't be gaslit because they're realities. It's even interesting that who is the quote that you read? It's the head of the FDA who said the things about your criminal.
That was Pfizer.
Pfizer.
CEO
that's Pfizer.
of Pfizer.
CEO of Pfizer. Thank you. So what's interesting and is just a reality that does not need to be gaslit is that some of the biggest criminal fines, if not the biggest criminal fines in history for fraud, are from the manufacturers of vaccines and of medications that we take. It doesn't mean that I'm against all medication or all vaccines by any means, but these are realities that, again, just shouldn't be gaslit. And I have seen that gaslit. I have seen people share like, oh, someone said that these companies are some of the highest, they've paid some of the highest criminal fines in the history of the US for fraud. And then they'll be like, LOL. And like, I don't think that's funny. No. I mean, it's very true. It's very well documented.
But there is some truth to the bigger the company, you're going to get sued too.
Very true. But just to say, you can read the reports on the DOJ, the United States Department of Justice. You can certainly read them. They're not, Pfizer has paid over in one settlement, $2.3 billion. GlaxoSmithKline paid $3 billion. Merck paid $4.85 billion. Johnson & Johnson paid $2.2 billion. And I mean, it is interesting to read the reports. Like some are things, for example, one that Merck paid, was it Merck? They did take it off of the market after they saw that it was Vioxx, the painkiller. They marketed it. They thought it was safe. Once they saw that after 18 months of use, it was causing heart attacks and strokes in thousands of users. So they removed it from the market. So it's not as if after that data came out, they kept pushing it or anything. So I think they're worth looking into.
Another funny meme that I saw, I wish I could pop it up. When we get our new streaming software, we'll be able to put all these funny things up. I can't wait. But it said it went through number of lobbyists that each of these companies had. And it was like Pfizer has like 82 lobbyists, and Johnson & Johnson has like 62 lobbyists, and Merck has like 44 Washington, D.C. lobbyists. And then it said natural immunity, 0. There's some truth to that one too.
Another thing, and like truthfully, if someone is very convinced that everyone, even with all the data, everyone needs these shots, regardless of who you are and your risk factors and natural immunity, I think that person does need to address some of these claims. Like we need to address the fact that vaccine manufacturers are almost always liability free. Certainly if this COVID vaccine is added to the CDC recommended list for schools, then it will be completely liability free under the 1986 Childhood Vaccination Injury Act. And those are things worth knowing because there's no drug that is liability free in that way. Or the drug manufacturers are liable. The vax manufacturers are not.
Goodness gracious, this hour passed by fast. Is there anything else that you wanted to add with all of this?
I could go on, but we can talk another day. I hope some of this was helpful. I don't know. Maybe everyone knows.
Yeah, the bottom line is that I gather from all of this is that more research needs to be done. And Pfizer needs to look into some of these practices. So does the FDA. And they need to get back to the public and explain what happened, to fact check it a little better, rather than just telling us that we just need to blindly follow the science and just believe that what they're doing. Because this particular report from the BMJ shows that there were some issues. There's some issues with how they conducted their trials, how they treated the people who were that were working under this experiment or under the trials. It sounds like some of the safety issues and not reporting some of the symptomatic stuff. And there's some problems. There's some red flags. Again, we're not saying that it means the vaccine is bad or that you shouldn't get it. Doesn't mean that. And we're also saying that it means for sure that you should get it too. It just means what we've been saying all along, that everybody needs to do their own research. You need to talk to your doctor. You need to take a serious look in the mirror and ask yourself, how many comorbidities do I have? What are my risks? Talk to your doctor about that. Come up with a game plan. Minnesota's positivity rate right now is bordering 10%.
Which is very
For
high.
case positivity or test positivity.
Yeah.
And it's going to keep going up, is my guess, for the next month here. So protect those people who are at most risk, your loved ones, your grandmothers, people who have those pre-existing conditions. You know, do what you need to do to protect yourself and to protect others, and to just realize that this is happening. It is real. It is real. So thank you, Leona, for doing all the research on this information. Thank you guys for tuning in. We'll ask you to smash the like button if you can. Send out this video to your friends and family. Thank you for subscribing and helping us to grow this channel. And have a good night, everybody, and God bless you all.
Thanks, guys.
There it is.